The letter came back to Mercy Allgood on a wet grey forenoon in the November of 1815, in her own hand, her own seal, whole and unbroken, and across the front of it in another's writing the single word, returned. She had carried it down to the receiving office at Albrook herself in September, and paid the postage on it herself, 6pence she could ill spare, and watched the clerk drop it in the bag for Halloway Priory. And here it was on her own table again, 9 weeks later. The seal she had pressed with her father's plain steel fob still standing on it, the wax never lifted, never read, sent back the length of the valley unopened as a tradesman sends back a bill he means to dispute. She stood in the cold parlour of the little glebe house, with the rain talking in the broken gutter, and turned the thing over once in her fingers, and did not, that first minute, do anything at all. The fire was not lit. The old lurcher Verity got up from the hearthstone where there was no warmth to keep him, and came and leaned his grey muzzle against her knee, because he had learned in the worst year of both their lives to know the look of her when something had been taken away. She read the word, returned a second time, in case the rain on the window had made her read it wrong. It had not. The hand that wrote it she did not know, a clerk's hand, or a housekeeper's, not his. He had not so much as seen the outside of it. Somebody at the great house had taken her letter out of the bag and looked at the direction and sent it back to her with one word, and the Duke of Halloway, who had once read her hand by candlelight as if it were the only print in England worth the trouble, had been let know nothing of it at all. What she did not do, that grey forenoon, was weep, or write again, or walk up to the Priory and beat upon its doors. She had been 6 years in a cathedral, close earning her own bread among people who looked through a poor copyist as through a clean window, and she had learned the one accomplishment such a life teaches, which is to stand quite still while a thing goes through you, and to keep your face. She put the returned letter inside the breast of her grey gown, against the flat, pinchbeck locket that held her mother's hair, and she lit the fire after all, with 3 of the precious sticks, because the dog was cold, and she sat down at her father's sloped desk under the streaming window and took out the slim packet of his letters tied in faded rose ribbon, the Duke's letters, all the letters of that one bright summer. And she laid the returned one on top of them and tied the ribbon round again. And she said aloud, to the dog, in the level voice she would have used to tell a child the sum was wrong and must be done over, that there was an error somewhere in this account, as her father always said, there was when a column would not cast, and that an error was not mended by crying over it, but by going back to the entries, one by one, in the order they were made, until the wrong figure was found. She did not yet know where in the long, sad sum of that year it stood. She knew only that it was there, because she knew what she had and had not done, the way one knows a thing one has lived, and she meant to find it, and to set it where it could be read. She did not guess that forenoon that she would set it at last on a sideboard of silver and ices in the blazing saloon of Halloway Priory, on the night the county was bidden to see the Duke betrothed to another woman, and read it aloud, her own letter, before them all. Mercy Allgood was 24 that autumn, the only child of the late Reverend Josiah Allgood, 36 years curate, and then rector of the small downland parish of Albrook Underwood in the chalk country west of Winchester, dead of a low fever the spring before, and lying now under a plain stone in his own churchyard, with room cut beneath his name for one more. She was slight and very upright, at a little over 5'4", with pale flaxen brown hair, parted plain, and pinned in a low smooth knot that would not stay quite smooth, large steady hazel eyes that went near amber by firelight, and the clear fair indoor skin of a young woman who had worked at small print and fine stitches by candle for years, and eaten plainly. She wore that morning a closed grey stuff gown with a white tucker at the throat, and a drab shawl much darned, and at her breast the flat oval locket on its black ribbon, her mother's, who had died bearing her and whom she knew only as a curl of dark hair and a miniature the size of a thumbnail. She had her father's grave, contained mouth, and his trick of going stiller, not louder, under trouble, and she had been taught by him, from the time she could hold a pen, the one doctrine he held above all the divinity on his shelf, that a poor, honest family's whole armour in this world is a thing written down plainly at the time it happened, and that the meanest fact set down true on the day is worth more in the end than the finest word sworn to afterward by the great. He had taught her that doctrine, as it fell out, with a parish register and a goose quill, the year she was 11, and she had never forgotten the lesson nor the day. A great landowner of the next valley had tried that year to deny a poor cottager's son his settlement and his bread, by swearing the boy had been born over the parish line, and so was none of Albrook's charge. And her father had walked the man quietly into the vestry, and opened the register at the year of the boy's birth, and laid his finger on the entry he had written himself with his own hand on the very Sunday of the christening, the date, the parents, the place, plain and dated and past all argument, and the great man had gone red and then white, and had paid the boy his due, and gone home, and never tried that parish again. She had stood in the vestry door and seen it. "The book does not forget," her father had said to her, walking home over the down in the dusk. "The book was written while the thing was happening, and a man may swear what he likes afterward, but he cannot make the ink say what it does not say. Keep the book, Mercy, whatever book is given you to keep. It is the one honest history a poor house owns, and it has saved a soul or two before now." She had been 11, and had thought it only one of Papa's sayings. She was 24, with a letter sent back unopened against her heart, before she understood that he had been handing her, that dusk on the down, the only weapon she would ever have. For the manner of the parish and of all the chalk country thereabout was the manner of people who lived by what was written down, because so little else in their lives held still. They were a downland folk of flint and brick villages and small grey churches, of water meadows drowned and drawn by the hatches in their season, of beech hangers turning bronze on the hill, and a clear chalk stream running silver through the bottom of every parish, and above them all on its pale rise stood the great house of the country, Halloway Priory, the seat of the Dukes of Halloway, a long Palladian pile of fair stone that the valley measured its weather and its fortunes against, as another country measures itself against a mountain. The priory was the great fact of all their lives. Its land lay round half the parishes, its charities fed the old, its pew filled the chancel, its lights, on a great night, could be seen from the down for miles, every tall window gold at once, and the cottagers would come out to their doors to look at the blaze of it and go in again and bank their own one candle. Mercy had grown up under the shadow and the bounty of that house as every soul in the valley had, and had no more thought to enter it as anything but a copyist or a music teacher than she had thought to enter the moon. She had entered it first, as it happened not at all. She had met its master at the bottom of the valley, on the plain timber footbridge over the chalk stream at Albrook, 2 summers before, over a dropped book of music, and had not for a quarter of an hour known who he was. She was carrying home across the bridge a borrowed volume of Corelli to copy out fair for the Winchester organist, her summer's bread, and the wind off the water took the loose leaves of it and scattered half a sonata into the watercress and the shallows. And a tall, dark, grave young man, in plain country clothes, who was leaning on the far rail, watching the trout, came and waded in without a word, and gathered the wet leaves out of the stream, one by one, and gave them back to her, dripping in their right order, Having glanced at the numbers in the corner and set them straight as he came, she had thanked him, and they had stood on the bridge a while in the green shade with the kingfisher reach below them, and talked of the music, which he knew, and of the stream, which he knew better, and of nothing that signified. And he had a low, grave voice, and a way of looking at a thing as if it had no hope of deceiving him, and a rare, slow smile that came up from somewhere deep and went again. And she had taken him for a steward's son, or a half-pay officer, or some grave gentleman's secretary on a walking holiday, and had liked him, plainly and at once, in a way she had not liked anyone in the careful, sidelong years of the close. It was old Mrs. Tapp at the mill who told her, going home, that the gentleman she had been seen talking with on the Albrook Bridge an hour together was no secretary at all, but his Grace himself, the young Duke of Holloway, new to his title that very year, and walking his own water. And Mercy had gone home, and sat down and been ashamed of having talked so freely, and had thought that was the end of it. A thing to remember and be quiet about, as a poor parson's daughter must be quiet about most things. It had not been the end of it. He had come to the bridge again the next week, having found out, she learned long after, from the same Mrs. Tapp, who the grave young woman was that copied music and kept her dead father's parish so exactly. And he had brought a fault in the Corelli he wanted her opinion of, which was a pretext, and she had known it was a pretext, and had given her opinion all the same, which was sound, because she would not pretend to be a fool to please any man, duke or no. And so it had begun, in the green of that summer, the strangest and the briefest and the dearest passage of her quiet life. He was 28, 3 years come into a dukedom he had never looked to hold, his father and his elder brother both dead within a 12-month of each other, the whole weight of the great house and its land and its name come down on a younger son who had been bred for the army and the quiet life and not for any of it. Grave with the suddenness of it, overgoverned, lonely in his own enormous house among people who managed him. And he had found at the bottom of his own valley a girl who did not want anything of him that he could see, who looked at him level out of steady hazel eyes and corrected his Corelli and asked him nothing and was not afraid of him, and he had come back and back and back. They met at the bridge and walked the water meadows and sat in her father's shabby book-lined parlour, while the old rector, who liked the young man for himself before ever he knew the half of what was toward, talked Greek and the chalk stream's natural history at him by the hour, and asked nothing either. It was a courtship conducted, as far as the valley saw it at all, in plain sight and great innocence, over music and trout and the parish register, 2 grave, quiet people finding in each other the one thing each most lacked, which was somebody to be wholly honest with. Her father had died that next spring, before anything was said or settled, of the low fever that took him in a fortnight, and the Duke had come to the funeral and stood bareheaded in the chalk rain at the plain grave with the parish, and had not cared who saw him weep for the old scholar who had asked him nothing. And it was after the funeral, in the wreck of that loss, with Mercy left alone in the world with a dog and a packet of letters and the prospect of going back to the close at Winchester to copy other people's music till she died, that he had spoken at last, on the bridge, plainly, as he did everything. He had told her that he knew exactly what the world would say, and that he did not care what the world would say, that he had been 3 years among people who valued him for his coronet and his rent-roll, and not one of them had ever asked him a question to which they wanted the true answer until her. That he was lonely past bearing in the great house and meant to be lonely no longer, and that he asked her, a poor parson's portionless daughter, to be his wife and the Duchess of Holloway, and would ask no one's leave to do it, being his own master at last in this, if in nothing else, and she, who loved him and knew it, had yet been honest with him even then, as her father had bred her. She had told him what it would cost him, the county's tongues, his great relations' fury, the long uphill years of a duchess the world thought had trapped him. She had set it all before him, the whole reckoning, the way her father set a sum before a doubtful debtor, and bidden him be sure he could pay it before he signed. And he had said, with the slow smile coming up, that he had at last met a woman who tried to talk him out of marrying her by being too honest, and that this was precisely why he meant to do it. And so they were. That grey spring, between the old rector's death and his burial barely cold, privately and entirely promised, the one bright certain thing in the saddest season of her life. They were not, of course, to publish it at once. He was the head of a great house, with 100 duties and a year's mourning of his own not done. She was a parson's daughter not 3 weeks orphaned. There was a decent time to be kept, and his nearest relations to be told, and the whole vast machinery of such a marriage to be set in slow motion. He would tell his aunt first, he said, the Honourable Mrs. Vereker, his late uncle's widow, who had kept his house and managed his affairs, and, since his mother died, managed a good deal of him, and who must be brought to it carefully, being a proud woman with high notions of the family, and her own ideas of whom he ought to wed. But bring her to it he would, he said, for though she ruled the house she did not rule him, whatever she supposed. He would speak to his aunt, and to Mr. Sopwith, his steward who had the running of the estate, and was an honest, dry old stick and would not mind. And when his own mourning was decently out at midsummer, they would let the thing be known, and be married in the autumn at Albrook Church, where her father lay, with the parish that had known her all her life to see it. That was the whole of the plan, made on the footbridge in the spring rain with the dog at their feet, and the stream running full and silver beneath, and it was a good plan, and an honest one, and it never came to pass, because Mercy Allgood had reckoned the cost of everything in that marriage, except the one thing she had no way to reckon, which was how far a proud, frightened woman would go, in the dark, with a pen, to keep the blood of the Carfaxes out of the hands of a girl who copied music for 6pence a quire. She had seen the aunt but twice, and neither time to speak to. Mrs. Cassandra Vereker was 53 that year, the widow of the late Duke's younger brother, a tall, spare, very upright woman who had come to the Priory a bride 30 years before, buried her husband young, and stayed on to make herself first the late Duke's hostess and housekeeper, and then, when he and his heir died within the year, the indispensable manager of a young head of the house who had been bred to other things and knew nothing of running a great estate. She had a handsome, long, pale, well-bred face, iron-grey hair dressed high and exact under fine lace, cold light blue eyes that had taught themselves to look gracious, and a thin, practised mouth. She dressed always in costly, quiet silks of the newest cut, dove and slate and grey, with good jet, and one old diamond and a little chiming chatelaine of keys and seals at her waist, and she was, by the universal account of the valley, the real ruler of Halloway Priory, the young Duke being, as the cottagers said, a good young man, but led. She had given 30 years of her life to that house and that family, had no child of her own to spend herself on, and had poured the whole of a strong, barren, proud nature into the one thing left her, the consequence of the name. And she had marked out, this long while, the young Duke's marriage as the crown of her life's work, and had a great heiress in her eye for him, Miss Honoria Brace, whose grandfather's £100,000 and whose father's Wiltshire acres marched conveniently with Halloway's own. To such a woman, the news that her managed nephew meant to throw himself and the dukedom away on a penniless dead curate's daughter he had picked up over a music book on a footbridge was not a disappointment merely. It was the ruin of her life's design, an insult to the blood, and a thing, she told herself, in the long reaches of her sleepless pride, that any aunt who truly loved the family was bound in conscience to prevent by whatever means a clever, determined woman could find. She did not, Mercy came to understand much later, think of herself as wicked. She thought of herself as the only one with the courage to save the family from itself, and that, her father would have told her, is the most dangerous liar in any parish, the one who has persuaded herself that her lie is a duty. What the aunt did, she did with patience and great care over the early summer of that year, while the lovers waited out their decent time and suspected nothing, and the shape of it Mercy pieced together only afterward, entry by entry, the way she pieced together everything. The Duke had told his aunt of the engagement in May, as he had said he would, expecting opposition and meaning to overrule it, and the aunt, far too clever to oppose him to his face and so harden him, had received the news with a cool, grave calm that disarmed him, had said only that she must, of course, wish him happy if his heart was fixed, and had asked, very reasonably, only for a little time, that a thing so weighty should not be published in haste, that the world might be brought to it gently and the young woman herself given a season to be looked at and known before the irrevocable step. It was the most reasonable thing in the world, and the Duke, relieved beyond measure to meet calm where he had braced for storm, had granted it gladly, and agreed that nothing should be said or done before midsummer at the soonest, and so had handed his aunt, with his own trusting hand, the one thing she needed, which was time, and the appearance of his confidence, and a clear field to work in unwatched. For the aunt had understood at once what the Duke in his honest love had not, that the engagement was as yet a private thing, resting on nothing written, nothing published, nothing but the spoken word of two people, and that a private thing, not yet rooted, may be killed in the dark if one is quick and quiet and entirely without scruple, and no one ever know it had been done. She set herself first to learn the lover's commerce, which was easy, for it went by the common post and through her own house, and she found that they wrote to each other near every day, the Duke and the curate's daughter, long letters, his carried down to Albrook by a groom, and hers carried up by the receiving office, and that the Duke kept hers, all of them, tied in a packet in a drawer of the small writing-room that the aunt, as mistress of the house, had every right to enter and every key to open, and she conceived, out of those letters and out of her own cold cleverness, the plan that was to part them, not to forbid the match which would only fix the young man in it, but to make him believe, on what should seem the plainest evidence, that the girl had never loved him at all, that she had played him, a lonely, rich young duke, for his title and his money, as coldly as any adventuress on the town, and that she was, behind her grave, honest, hazel-eyed front, in a secret understanding with another man the whole time. It was a cruel plan, and a clever one, for it struck at the single thing on which the whole engagement stood, which was the Duke's faith that here at last was one person in the world entirely honest with him. Poison that faith, and the marriage fell of itself, and the proud young man's own wounded pride would do the rest and keep him from ever asking her a question that might undo the lie. And the aunt had the means to poison it, because she had the letters, and a steady hand, and 30 years' knowledge of how the great are gulled. The instrument she used was a forgery, and a clever forgery, built upon truth, which is the only kind that holds. Among the parish's people there was a young man, one Lieutenant Bram Caudle, a half-pay naval officer, the orphan son of the late rector's oldest friend, who had been bred almost as Mercy's brother in the glebe house in their childhood, and who wrote to her still, 2 or 3 times a year, plain affectionate letters of no more than a brother's warmth from wherever the peace had stranded him, and one such letter, an old one, signed with his Christian name and full of the easy tenderness of a man who had known her from a child, lay in the very packet of the Duke's keeping, Mercy having once shown it him with perfect openness as the letter of her oldest friend. the aunt took that true letter for her foundation. She had, among her many useful acquaintance, a broken attorney's clerk in Winchester who would do delicate work for money and ask nothing. And to him, by a trusted maid, she carried a sheet of Mercy's own writing, got from the packet, and the caudal letter, and a sum of money. And there was made, over some weeks, a letter that purported to be from Mercy Allgood to Lieutenant Caudle, in Mercy's own hand to the life, dated that very June, in which the writer, in cool laughing terms, owned to her old love that she had as good as hooked the great fish at last, that the foolish Duke was entirely taken in and would marry her by the autumn, that she would have him for his coronet and his rent-roll, and be Duchess of Halloway and laugh at them all, and that Bram must only have patience, for a duchess might do as she pleased, and an old friend should not be forgotten when she was great. It was a vile letter, and a masterly one. It took Mercy's true hand, and Mercy's true old friend, and Mercy's own honest reckoning of what the marriage would cost the Duke, which she had made to his face out of love, and twisted every line of it into its own cold opposite, and when it was perfect, the aunt arranged, by a corrupt go-between and a little staged carelessness, that this letter should fall, as if by the merest accident of a dropped pocket-book, into the Duke's own hands, in such a way that he must believe he had surprised a secret never meant for his eyes. And so he did. Of that day, Mercy could never afterward bear to think long, the day in late June, when the whole sweet structure of her life came down without a sound, and she not even by to see it fall. The Duke had been given the forged letter on a Tuesday, had read it, alone, in the small writing-room, among the true letters of hers he had kept and trusted, and had believed it. Why should he not? It was her hand, past mistaking. It named her oldest friend, whom he knew of. It dated itself that very month, and it said, in cold black ink, the one thing that struck straight through the single weak place in a lonely, proud young man's heart, that he had been played for his money like any fool, that the honesty he had loved was a mask, that the one person he had trusted in the world had been laughing at him behind it the whole time. There is no man so easily destroyed as the one who has staked everything on a single trust. And the aunt had measured her nephew to the inch. He did not come to Mercy to ask her if it were true. That was the cruelty of the thing, and the cleverness, for the lie was so framed that to come and ask would be to show himself the gull the letter named, and his wounded pride forbade it, exactly as the aunt had known it would. He shut the trust out of his heart, as a man shuts a door on a fire, and turned the key, and would not open it again. He wrote Mercy one letter, that black week, the last she ever had from him until the night of the ball, a short letter, in a hand she hardly knew for the strain of it, that said only that he had learned what he had learned, that he would name nothing and accuse nothing, being unwilling to make a public scandal of a private folly, but that the understanding between them was at an end, wholly and forever, and that he begged she would not write to him, nor seek to see him, the thing being past all remedy, and best buried in silence by them both. He did not say what he had learned. He did not give her the chance to answer it. He shut the door, and was gone behind it, and the great house closed over him like water, and the aunt, watching her work prosper, said grace at her own table that night, Mercy did not doubt, with a clear conscience and a sense of duty nobly done. Mercy had read that last short letter of his standing in the Glebe House parlour in the June light, and had not understood it, and had read it again, and still not understood it, for it spoke of a thing learned, a folly discovered, an understanding betrayed, and named none of them, and she could find in her own conscience nothing answering to any of it, no folly, no betrayal, nothing but a love given wholly, and a reckoning made honestly, and a plan laid in the spring rain. She had written back at once, of course, 3 times that week, asking him plainly what he had heard and of whom, begging him only to tell her the charge that she might answer it, for she could not fight a shadow, and her letters had been received at the Priory, she did not doubt, and never reached him, the aunt having now the keeping of all that came and went, and she had had no answer, and the silence had shut down over her like the lid of the tin box on her father's desk. And then in September, when she could bear the not knowing no longer, she had written him one last letter, the long one, the careful one, the one she made fair 3 times over at the sloped desk by candle, as if it were the most important copying of her life, which it was. A letter that laid the whole of her heart before him, plainly and without pride, that asked nothing back, that did not beg, that told him only the simple truth, that she did not know what he believed of her, but knew it was not so. That whatever he had been shown, she had loved him from the bridge and loved him still, and had played him false in no particular and never would. And that if he would only tell her, one day, the thing he thought she had done, she would meet it with the truth, and he might judge between them, and that meanwhile she released him from everything and wished him, with her whole soul, well. She had sealed it with her father's plain steel fob, and carried it down to the office at Albrook herself, and paid her 6pence, and watched it go into the bag for the Priory. And 9 weeks later it had come back to her, the seal whole, the wax unlifted, never read, with one word across the front in a stranger's hand, returned, and that was the morning the November rain was in the broken gutter, and the fire was not lit, and the dog came and leaned his head against her knee, and Mercy Allgood, who had wept at her father's grave, and wept at the last short letter in June, did not weep at all, but sat down at the desk and tied her own returned letter on the top of his, and said to the dog that there was an error in the account, and that she would find it, for the returning of the letter unopened did a thing the aunt had not foreseen. Clever as she was, it told Mercy, past all doubt, that she was not fighting the Duke at all. The Duke might believe a lie of her. A man in love and lied to may believe anything, and her quarrel with that was grief, not suspicion. But the Duke would not have sent back her letter unopened with one cold word in a clerk's hand. Whatever he thought of her, he had loved her once, and he was not a small man, nor a cruel one. If her letter had reached him, he would have read it, if only to despise it. He would never have refused even to break the seal. Somebody else had done that. Somebody at the Priory was intercepting her letters and sending them back unread, which meant that somebody at the Priory was afraid of what her letters might say, if they were read. And a person is only afraid of the truth coming out when the person knows the truth is otherwise than has been told. The very act meant to crush her was the first hard fact in her hand. It told her there was a hand between her and the Duke, stopping the truth. And a hand that stops the truth is a guilty hand. She did not yet know whose. But she knew now, as she had not fully known before, that there was a lie, a made lie, a thing done on purpose by a living person who could be found. And that changed everything. Her father had not taught her to mourn an error in an account. He had taught her to find it. She put away grief that November morning, as a worker puts away a coat to do a heavy task, and she set herself, alone, poor, friendless, and 24, against the cleverest and most powerful woman in the valley, with no weapon in the world but her dead father's doctrine, that a thing written down plainly at the time it happened cannot afterward be made to say what it does not say. She began, as he had taught her, with what she had, and set it down in order. She took a fresh sheet and ruled it, and made her first entries as plain as a toll. She had a last short letter from the Duke in June, breaking the engagement, that spoke of a thing learned and named it not. She had 3 of her own letters of that summer, written in answer, that had been received at the Priory, and never answered. She had her last long letter of September, Come back in November unopened, marked returned in a hand not the Duke's. She now saw, looking hard at the returned letter, more than the word. She had the receiving officer's own marks upon it, the Albrook stamp of the day she posted it, and a second mark of the day it was sent back, and the office kept, she knew, a book of all that passed, the postage being public money. So that the very journey of her letter, up to the Priory and back unread, was itself written down in a public book by a public officer who had no interest in the matter and could not be gainsaid. That was her first true entry, and she made it carefully, that the office at Albrook would have, in its own book, the record that a letter from Mims Allgood to His Grace at Halloway Priory was sent up on such a day and returned undelivered on such another, the dates fixed, the thing public. She did not yet know what use it would be. She set it down because it was true and written and could be had. And her father's voice in her was very plain that morning, that you gather every true entry you can come at first, and find afterward which of them casts the column. For you never know, he used to say, which figure is the one that proves the fraud until you have them all before you and can see where the wrong one stands. The second entry she could not make from her own parlour, and to get it she had to go up, at last, toward the great house she had not approached since June. Not to its doors, but to its edges, where the truth of a great house always lies, among its servants and its tradespeople, and the small public officers of its parish, who see everything and are reckoned by the great to see nothing. And here, that hard winter, Mercy Allgood found that the years of her quiet, honest life among poor people had laid up for her a kind of credit she had never thought to draw on. She was the old rector's daughter. She had taught half the valley's children their letters and their music for next to nothing. She had sat up with their sick and written their letters for the unlettered, and kept their father's register fair when he grew too blind, and there was not a cottage, nor a farm, nor a shop between Albrook and the Priory gates where the name of Miss Allgood was not spoken with a plain rough kindness that the aunt, for all her châtelaine of keys, could not command in 30 years. The valley had heard, as the valley hears everything, that the young Duke had been as good as promised to the parson's girl, and had thrown her off of a sudden in the summer, and was now, by his aunt's contriving, to marry the great Wiltshire heiress instead. And the valley, in its slow, shrewd way, had drawn its own conclusions, and did not like them, and was minded, in its small, careful manner, to be of use to Miss Allgood if a way offered, the more so as nobody could quite say what Miss Allgood had done to deserve her fall, and the valley misliked above all things a thing it could not account for in a person it had always found straight. It was through the valley then, and not against it, that Mercy worked that winter, slowly, patiently, asking little and watching much, gathering her entries as a gleaner gathers a hard field, a head of corn at a time, from Mrs. Tapp at the mill, who had first told her who the grave young man on the bridge was. She had the whole common talk of the Priory's servants' hall, that the young Duke had been like a man under a cloud since midsummer, grave and short, and unlike himself, shut up much alone, and that the great match with Miss Brace was none of his seeking, but all the aunt's pushing, and that the servants who loved him, and many did, said among themselves that something had been done to him that none of them rightly understood, for he had been a different man before St. John's tide. From the Albrook post clerk, a careful young man whom Mercy had taught his sums, she had at last, with much delicacy on both sides, the second hard entry she had set herself to get. The office did keep its book, and the book did show, in the clerk's own hand, the dates of her September letters going up and its November return, plain and public and dated. And more, the clerk owned, going red, that he had thought it a strange thing at the time, for a great house does not commonly send back the letters of a decent person unopened, and that he had noticed, looking at the marks, that the letter had not lain at the Priory above a day or two before it was sent back, as though it had been refused at the very door and never carried in at all. That was a true entry, and a telling one, and Mercy wrote it down. The letter refused at the threshold, turned within a day, never suffered to go into him. A hand at the door, stopping the truth before it could cross the sill. But the entry that broke the case, the wrong figure in the whole sad sum, came to Mercy that winter from the one quarter the aunt had never thought to guard, because the aunt, like all who despise the small, had forgotten that the small keep books too. It came from the household account book of Halloway Priory itself, and it came by the hand of Mr. Eldred Sopwith, the ducal steward, the dry old man of business whom the Duke had once meant to tell of the engagement, and who proved, in the end, the protagonist's truest ally, though the two of them barely exchanged a dozen sentences in the whole affair. Mr. Sopwith was 60, spare and narrow and grey as a winter hedge, in sober snuff-brown, with pale, shrewd eyes and a careful, neutral face. He had kept the books of the estate for 35 years, man and boy, under 3 dukes, and he was that rare and valuable thing, an entirely honest servant of a great house who served the house and not its faction, and who had watched the aunt's management of the young Duke these 3 years, with a private disrelish he was far too prudent ever to show. He had loved the old rector, who had been the only gentleman in the parish to treat the steward as an equal and talk books with him of an evening, and he had a daughter of his own, and he had marked, with his careful, neutral face, giving nothing away, the strange business of the summer. The young woman thrown off without a reason that anyone could name, the great match got up in a hurry, the master gone grave as a tomb. And he had said nothing to anyone, because it was not his place, and he had no evidence, and a steward who guesses aloud against the mistress of the house is a steward turned off without a character. But he kept the books. He kept all the books. And in the books, as it fell out, the aunt had left, without ever dreaming it, the print of her own crime. For crime costs money, and money in a great, well-ordered house goes down in a book. It had come about in the plainest way, by the plain working of an honest system against a dishonest deed. The aunt, to have her forgery made, had needed her broken attorney's clerk in Winchester, and her corrupt go-between, and her trusted maid to carry the sheets to and fro, and such people are not paid in love. She had paid them, necessarily, in money. And being a woman who for 30 years had handled the house's money and her own through the steward's office and the house's accounts, and being besides too proud and too careful to keep large sums by her in a way that might be remarked, she had drawn the money she needed in the ordinary course, in sums entered, as all such sums must be, in the household book against some colourable head, a journey, a charity, a commission, a piece of plate. And Mr. Sopwith, who entered or oversaw every line of that book and forgot nothing, had noticed that summer 3 several payments, not large but not small, drawn by the aunt within the very weeks of the engagement's breaking, to heads that did not, when he came quietly to look into them, as it was his duty to look into everything, answer to any service the house had received. A sum to a Winchester man for work, never delivered to the house, a sum for a journey the under-coachman's own day-book showed had never been made, a sum in charity to a person the parish books knew nothing of. He had noticed them at the time, as he noticed everything, with his careful face, giving nothing, had made, being the man he was, a small private note of his doubt in his own memorandum book against the day it might signify, and had said not one word to a living soul, there being nothing to say and everything to lose. He did not know what the payments were for. He knew only that they were entered false, 3 of them, in the weeks the master's heart was broken, by the one hand in the house that had reason to wish the parson's daughter gone. And he kept the knowledge, as he kept the books, exact and silent and ready. How that silent knowledge came at last into Mercy's hands is a thing the valley told for years after at the smithy and the church porch, and told always with a particular relish, for it turned on the smallest and most domestic of hinges. Mr. Sopwith had a daughter, Patience Sopwith, a grave, quiet girl of 19, who had been one of Mercy's music pupils in the Close at Winchester 2 winters before, and had loved her teacher with the whole steady heart of a plain girl for a kind one. And Patience, going home to her father at the Priory for the Christmas, full of the servants' hall talk of the young Duke's cloud and the parson's daughter's fall, had spoken of it to her father with a warmth of indignation on Miss Allgood's behalf that she could not keep in, had said that whatever the great folk pretended, she who had known Miss Allgood would never believe an ill word of her, that there was not a straighter soul in Hampshire, and that it was a wicked shame, and somebody ought to do something. And the old steward, who had carried his silent doubt alone 1/2 a year, looking at his daughter's honest, angry face across his own hearth, had said nothing that night. But he had gone up afterward to his cold business room with its high desk and its green-ribboned bundles and its tin deed-boxes, and had stood a long while looking at the locked press where the household books were kept, and had taken down at last the book of that summer, and turned to the 3 false entries, and read them over by his one candle, as a man reads a thing he has known by heart for months, and had made his decision. He could not go to his master with a guess against the aunt. That way lay his own ruin, and no good done, for the Duke, sunk in his hurt pride, would never hear it. But he could, without one word spoken, let the right person see the right book. For the books of a great house, though kept private, are not the steward's own to hide a fraud in, but the master's, held in trust for truth. And an honest steward who suspects them, made to cover a crime against the house, may surely let the wronged party look upon the entries, and judge, and act. He was 60, and had kept faith all his life, and he chose, that Christmas night, to keep it with the dead rector's daughter rather than with the living lie. And he did it in character, for he did not write to Mercy, nor send for her, nor say a word that could ever be sworn to. He only told his daughter Patience the next morning in his dry, flat voice, looking out of the window and not at her, that if Miss Allgood, of whom Patience thought so well, were ever to ask to see the parish charity accounts that the late rector had used to audit, which were lodged of right in the steward's office and open to any parishioner with a proper interest, she should of course be shown them as the late rector's daughter and successor in that small trust, and that she would find them kept, as all that office's books were kept, in the same press and the same hand and the same order, and that a person who understood books, as Miss Allgood did, would no doubt find the officer's bookkeeping instructive. And he had said no more, and gone to his work, and Patience, no fool though young, had carried that strange dry speech to Mercy in the glebe house within the week, every word of it, not understanding it, and Mercy, who had been bred at the foot of just such another honest man, understood it entirely. So it was that on a hard, bright, frosty morning in the January of 1816, Mercy Allgood walked up at last to Halloway Priory, not to its great door, but round to the plain office entrance at the side, in her dove-grey woolen and her rubbed pale black spencer, with a proper parishioner's claim to see the parish charity accounts her father had audited 30 years, and was admitted by Mr. Sopwith himself, with a dry, grave civility that gave nothing away to the maid who showed her in, and was seated at a side table in the cold business room with the green-ribboned charity accounts before her, the books her father had kept, and was left there, alone, by a steward who found he had business at the far end of the room, with his back turned, in a room whose locked press happened that morning to stand unlocked, and in which the household book of the foregoing summer happened to be lying out upon the high desk, open as though some careless person had been consulting it and gone away. And Mercy Allgood audited the parish charity accounts that morning with great care, for she was an honest woman and they were truly her trust, and she truly checked them. And while the ink dried on her honest work, she rose in that silent room and crossed to the high desk and read, by the cold north light, the 3 false entries in the household book of Halloway Priory, in the aunt's own well-known hand, dated to the very weeks of the engagement's breaking, the sum to the Winchester man for the work never had, the sum for the journey never made, the sum in charity to the person the parish never knew. And she read them twice, slowly, the way her father had read the register to the great man in the vestry. And she understood, standing there in the cold with the false figures under her eye and the steward's honest back turned at the window, that she had found, at last, the wrong figure in the account. Money had been paid, in secret, by the one hand that wished her gone, to persons who could only have been paid for one kind of work, in the very weeks her life came down, and it was written, in that hand, in that book, dated. And a thing written down, plainly at the time, it happened cannot afterward be made to say what it does not say. She did not touch the book, she did not take it, nor copy it where the steward must see her copy it, nor say one word that could ever be laid at his honest door. She read it into her memory, every figure and every date, as she had once learned whole sonatas by heart for want of paper to keep them on. And she went back to her own table and finished her honest audit and signed it and rose and thanked Mr. Sopwith for his courtesy in the hearing of the maid, and went out of the great house into the bright frost. And behind her the old steward locked the press again, his face giving nothing away, and went on with his work, having that morning, without one word that could ever be proved, kept the only faith he cared to keep. She had now the bones of it, and she set herself, through the rest of that frozen winter, to make of those bones a thing that could be shown. For Mercy understood, none better, that to know a truth is not to prove it, and that against the word and the standing of the Honourable Mrs. Vereker, the bare knowledge of a poor parson's daughter, however certain, was nothing, was less than nothing, was the very thing the world expected a thrown-off adventuress to invent. She must have it written, dated, public, in books that could not be gainsaid, and hands that had no interest in her cause. She must build, out of the small, honest records of the valley, a wall of dated fact so plain that the aunt's clever-spoken lie should break itself against it in front of witnesses, the way the great man's lie had broken against her father's register. And she must do it, she came slowly to see, not in a court, where she could never reach, and where a poor woman's suit against a duke's aunt would be smothered in a year of costs she could not pay, but in the one place where the whole truth could be made to fall at a single stroke before the only judge that signified, which was the Duke himself, and the whole county to see him judge. And the place, and the day, were given her, as such things are given, by her enemy's own hand. For in the cold of that February, it was published through all the county, in the Winchester paper and from the Priory gates, that His Grace, the Duke of Halloway, was contracted in marriage to Miss Honoria Brace of Brace Court in the county of Wilts, and that the betrothal would be celebrated by a grand ball at Halloway Priory on the evening of the 20th of March, to which the whole neighbourhood of any consequence was bidden. The aunt being determined, now that her long work was crowned, to set the seal on it before the world so publicly and so splendidly that nothing should ever after unsettle it. She had built her triumph a stage, and lit it with 1,000 candles, and bidden the county to witness it. And she had not dreamed, proud woman, that she was building the very scaffold of her own exposure, and lighting it, and gathering the witnesses with her own chiming ring of keys. For Mercy, reading the great gilt-edged notice of the ball in the Winchester paper by her one candle, with the dog asleep at her feet, knew on the instant that her hour was given her. A wrong done in private may be mended in private if the doer will, but a wrong published, crowned, set up before the whole county on a lit stage can only be answered on the same stage, before the same county, in the same hour. For the lie was now to be made public and permanent, and a public permanent lie leaves the wronged but one honest course, which is to meet it in the open with the truth. She would go to the ball. She would go to the great house that had sent back her letter unopened, on the very night it gathered the county to see the false match sealed, and she would carry with her not a word, not a plea, not an accusation of her own, which any of them might disbelieve, but the books, the dated honest records that no one could gainsay, and she would let them speak, as her father had let the register speak, plainly at the time, in front of all, and she would read aloud, before them all, in her own steady schoolroom voice, the one document that was the heart of the whole matter, and that they had refused even to open, her own last letter, come back to her unbroken, that they might hear at last, the Duke and the county and the proud aunt herself, the very words that Hand at the door had been so afraid of that it would not let them cross the sill. She would not gloat, and she would not rail, and she would accuse no one in so many words. She would only read what was written, and lay down what was dated, and let the truth do its own work in the silence. For she was her father's daughter, and she had been taught that the truth needs no help from anger, but only to be let into the room. She made her preparations through February and March in the same quiet order in which she did everything, and told no one her whole purpose, not even Patience Sopwith, that no breath of it might go up to the Priory before its time. She got herself bidden to the ball, which was easier than the proud aunt would have credited, for the invitation was to all the neighbourhood of consequence, and the rector of Albrook, the mild young man who had succeeded her father, held that the late rector's daughter was of the parish's first consequence, whatever the great house thought, and procured her a card without difficulty and without curiosity, supposing only that she went to make her curtsy like the rest, and thinking it brave and proper of her. She made over, for the third time in its life, her one good gown, the slip of unfigured oyster-white silk her father had given her in his last well year, under its sheer overdress of pearl-grey gauze, made it over deliberately quiet, plainer than any gown that would be in the room, long-sleeved, one narrow band of jet at the hem, and no other ornament, for she meant to stand in that blazing room of jewels and lace as a single grave note of truth stands in a lie, and to be looked at, when her hour came, not for her finery but for her plainness, which would be remembered. And she gathered, last and most carefully, the things she would carry, her own returned letter, the seal still whole, that she would break before them all and read, and, to lay down after it, one at a time, the dated witnesses that should turn her bare word into proof past gainsaying. The first of these she had, the returned letter itself, bearing on its face the Albrook office's own stamps of the day it went up and the day it came back, and behind the locket at her throat, where she had carried it all winter against her skin, the post-clerk's own signed memorandum, given her at last out of plain kindness and a copyist's fellow-feeling, that the office book showed the letter sent to the Priory on such a date, and returned undelivered, refused, within 2 days, in the clerk's own hand, and over his own name. That was the proof of the hand at the door, dated and public and sworn to by a disinterested officer, and it would show the county that her own letter, the very letter she would read them, had been kept from the Duke by force and sent back unread by somebody who feared it. The second witness she could not carry in the book, the household book being the Duke's own and locked in his own office. But she did not need to carry it, for it lived in the house where she was going, in the steward's own press, and she had it by heart, every false figure and date, and she had besides, what was better, the certainty that Mr. Sopwith, if it ever came to the point in his master's own house and his master's own hearing, was an honest man who would not lie to his master's face about his master's own books when his master asked him plainly. And Mercy meant, when her hour came, to make the Duke ask him plainly before them all, so that the truth should come not from her at all, but from his Grace's own trusted steward and his Grace's own accounts. And the third witness, the one that bound the whole and broke the lie's very foundation, she had got that very March, the last and the surest, out of the parish register her father had kept, and that lay still in the vestry at Albrook in his own hand. And it was the third witness, the dated entry in the old register, that turned the aunt's whole clever forgery from a thing merely denied into a thing proved by ink impossible. For Mercy, brooding all that winter on the forged letter she had never seen, but whose substance the servants' hall talk had at last let her piece together, had perceived where the clever lie, like all clever lies, had overreached itself in a particular, and the particular was a date and a name. The forged letter, to do its work, had been made to name her oldest friend, Lieutenant Bram Caudle, as the secret lover to whom she boasted of hooking the Duke. It had been dated that June, in the very season of the courtship, to show her false at the height of it, and it had been so framed the talk ran that the writer spoke of meeting her old love secretly, of his being near at hand, of stolen understandings that very summer in the valley. And there was the flaw, the wrong figure, the thing that ink could disprove, for Lieutenant Bram Caudle had not been near the valley that summer, nor that year, nor for 3 years past, being on the far side of the world, and better than that, plainer than that, past all argument or alibi, Lieutenant Bram Caudle was dead, and had been dead these 8 months, and the proof of it stood in her father's own register, and in the parish books of a Hampshire village, 40 miles off, where his people lay, and in the Navy's own lists, and in the very stone of the churchyard. He had died of the yellow fever aboard his ship in the West Indies in the August of the year before, and the news had come home that autumn, and Mercy herself, as the dead man's nearest tie, and the daughter of the parson who had stood godfather to him, had entered his death and the news of it in a memorandum in her father's register at the time, with the date, as her father had taught her to enter every fact that touched the parish. And there was besides a small tablet to his memory, put up by the parish of his birth, with the date of his death cut in the stone, that any soul might go and read. So that the forged letter, dated that June, in which Mercy was made to write to her dear living Bram of their summer's secret understanding, and bid him have patience till she was a duchess, was a letter written, by its own date, to a man 11 months in his grave. A love letter to a dead man, and no hand on earth, not the cleverest forger in Winchester, nor the proudest lady in Hampshire, could make the calendar give Bram Caudle back his life to receive it. The whole vile fabric rested on a secret living lover, and the lover had been dead and buried, and entered in the book, before ever the letter pretended to be written. And the entry was in her father's own hand, dated at the time, in the register that lay in the vestry, kept for 30 years by the one man in the valley, whose word about a date no soul alive would think to question. She had found the wrong figure, and it was a date. And a date, her father had taught her, is the one thing in this world that a liar cannot argue with, for it was written while the thing was happening, and the dead do not receive letters. She went, in the 2nd week of March, quietly in her plain bonnet, to the vestry at Albrook, and to the church 40 miles off, where the Caudles lay, hiring a humble conveyance, and spending for it nearly the last of the little money her father had left her, because the proof must be exact, and she would carry nothing to that great room that she had not seen with her own eyes and could not stand over. And she made fair copies, in her own clear copyist's hand, that the Winchester organist trusted with his Italian, of the register entry of Bram Caudle's death in her father's writing, with the date, and of the parish burial record of his people's church, and of the inscription on the memorial tablet, with its date cut in the stone. And she got the present rector of each parish to set his name to her copies as true copies of the originals, which they did willingly, knowing her and her errand not at all, supposing only that the late rector's daughter was setting her father's papers in order, as a good daughter should, and she folded these attested copies, the register entry and the burial and the tablet, small and flat, and set them ready with the returned letter and the post-clerk's memorandum. And she had now, complete, the whole armoury her father had bequeathed her, without knowing it, a letter to be read, that had been refused unread, a public officer's dated record that it had been so refused by a guilty hand at the door, the certain knowledge, lodged in the Duke's own house, in the Duke's own steward's honest keeping, of money paid in secret to forgers in the very weeks of her ruin, and the dated, attested, unanswerable fact that the forged letter's secret lover had been 11 months dead when the letter was feigned to be written to him. She had built her wall of dated fact, stone by honest stone, out of the small true books of the poor, and on the 20th of March she would carry it up to the great house and stand it up before the county, and let the proud, clever spoken lie come on and break itself against it. And she would do it. She promised her father's memory at his graveside the evening before, the chalk wind cold off the down and the dog grave beside her, without one word of anger or one breath of triumph, in his own way, by the book. For she had not undertaken this to be revenged, but to be believed. And there is a great difference, her father used to say, between wanting a man punished and wanting the truth told, and the whole worth of a soul may hang on which of the two it is that drives her up the hill. The 20th of March came in cold and clear after a week of rain, the chalk stream running full and silver in the valley bottom, the down white rimed at dawn and the beech hangers still bare. And as the early dark drew down, the great house of Halloway Priory lit itself window by window, along its long pale front, until the whole 13 bays of it blazed gold against the night, and the valley came out to its cottage doors in the frost, to look at the blaze, as it always did on a great night, and to wonder among themselves which of the carriages going up the lit sweep of gravel carried the parson's girl. That was said, none knew how truly, to be going up to her own undoing among her betters. For Mercy had not gone up in a carriage. She had no carriage, and would take none. She had walked up the 2 miles from the glebe house in the frost, in her pattens and her old cloak, over the oyster-white gown, with the dog Verity at her heel, because she could not make him stay, and in the end did not try, and her plain black reticule on her wrist, with the whole of her father's armoury folded small inside it, and she had changed her pattens for her one pair of good shoes in the cold of the great portico, among the stamping horses and the flaring links, with the footmen staring, and given her card to the groom of the chambers with a steady hand, and walked into the blaze of Halloway Priory alone, on no man's arm, the late rector's daughter, 24, with a letter to read. The great saloon of the Priory, when she came to the head of the stair and the doors were opened upon it, was such a room as she had never in her life stood in. And she stood in the doorway of it one moment, and let it strike her full, because she had come on purpose to be the one quiet thing in it, and she must first measure all that she was to be quiet against. It was a double cube of cool stone white and pale Wedgwood blue, the high ceiling painted and gilded and lifting away into shadow. 3 great cut-glass chandeliers down the length of it, each carrying its full freight of wax candles, so that the light came down in a golden rain and was thrown back, doubled and trebled from a ranked row of tall pier glasses down one wall, the chalk-white floor chalked over in patterns for the dancing, a small consort of musicians in a gallery at the upper end, banked hothouse flowers and orange trees in tubs, breathing out their out-of-season scent into the heat of the 100 candles. And at the lower end, on a slight dais, a long sideboard or buffet spread with the great gold and silver plate of the house, and ranged with ices and sweetmeats and the tall epergnes, where, the whole room understood, the betrothal was at the due hour to be announced and drunk. The room was full already, a great glittering press of the whole county's consequence, 300 people in their best, the women in white and rose and celestial blue lace and the family diamonds, the men in dark coats and knee-smalls and orders, a heat and a hum and a blaze of it all together that beat upon the senses like a wave. And into the edge of all that splendour stepped a slight, grave young woman in a plain oyster and pearl-grey gown, long out of the first mode, with a flat, pinchbeck locket at her throat and a lean, grey-muzzled dog at her heel, and stood quietly just within the door, and was, for a while, in all that crowd, marked by nobody at all. She had counted on that, the being marked by nobody at first. It was her father's method to come quiet into the room and let the great proceed in their security until the book was opened. She took a place a little aside, near the lower end, not far from the dais and the laden sideboard, where she could see the whole room and the doors, and, when he should come, the Duke. And she stood there with her hands quiet, and her chin level, and let the ball go on. And it went on about her, brilliant and unknowing, the dancers forming and the music lifting, while the one person who had come for a purpose stood still at the edge of it and felt her own heart go hard and steady, and put her hand once through the reticule's thin stuff on the folded papers within, the way a soldier touches the thing he carries into the fire, and was quiet. She saw the aunt first. The Honourable Mrs. Vereker was easy to see, for she was the true mistress of the night, and moved through her rooms as such. Tall and spare, and very upright in a gown of pale slate-grey silk of the newest Paris cut, with her iron-grey hair dressed high under fine old lace. The one great family diamond burning at her breast, good jet at her wrists, and at her waist, the little chiming chatelaine of keys and seals that the whole valley knew. Her long, pale, handsome face, composed in the gracious public smile that opened the room and closed every door in it, her cold, light eyes going everywhere, missing nothing, counting her triumph guest by guest. She was happy that night, in her own proud, cold fashion, as a general is happy on the field he has won. 30 years of patient management crowned, the dangerous girl long gone and forgotten, the great match made, the blood of the Carfaxes safe in the hands she had chosen, the whole county gathered to see it sealed, and she moved among her guests, dispensing her gracious smile and her gracious word, secure, mistress of all she surveyed, and never once, in all her sweeping watchful glance about the splendid room, let her eye light, or her thought rest 1/2 second upon the slight grey figure standing quiet by the lower wall with a dog at her heel, the parson's daughter being, in the aunt's whole reckoning of the world, a thing so wholly finished and beneath notice that she did not so much as see her, though she looked, in her counting of the room, twice straight at her. She saw Miss Brace next, the betrothed, the heiress, and was surprised by a movement of plain pity she had not looked to feel. Honoria Brace was a pretty fair girl of 20, round-faced and soft, in a great deal of expensive blonde lace and her grandmother's pearls, who stood near the dais where she had been placed, and smiled when she was spoken to, and looked, under all her finery and her anxious goodness, frightened and unhappy, and very young. A girl, Mercy saw at once, with the quick eye of one who had herself been a piece, moved on a board, who was no more the contriver of any of this than a glove is the contriver of the hand. Chosen for her acres and her £100,000, betrothed where she did not love to a grave man who did not love her, by an aunt's design and a father's bargain, and knowing it, and going through with it as a good, frightened, dutiful girl goes through with the thing her elders have arranged, because she does not know that she is allowed to do anything else. There was no triumph in Honoria Brace's pretty anxious face that night, and no malice, only a kind of patient dread, the look of a young creature waiting for a door to shut on her for good. And Mercy, who had come prepared to feel everything but tenderness for the girl chosen in her place, looked at her once, and understood her wholly, and was sorry for her, and folded that pity away with the rest, for it would have its use. For whatever else her hour at the ball did, it would unlock this frightened child from a match she dreaded as much as the Duke, and that was no small part of the Mercy meant to do. And then, at the upper end of the room, the music ceasing for a moment between the dances, she saw the Duke, and at the sight of him after 9 months, the hard-held steadiness of her heart was shaken for the first and only time that night, and she had to set her teeth and look down at the chalked floor a moment and master it, before she could lift her eyes again and look at him as she needed to look at him, plainly, to read what the year had done. He stood near the dais, doing the duty of his place, the host, the centre, the man the whole night was built around. Tall and dark and grave, in a coat of midnight blue superfine, and a white waistcoat and a plain fall of fine linen. One signet ring, no other ornament, carrying his consequence still like a coat that did not quite fit, and his face, his grave, high-coloured face that she had seen laugh on the bridge, was the face of a man performing a part chosen for him by others, and performing it because he could see no way out, courteous and correct and shut, the level dark grey eyes gone guarded and tired, the firm mouth set hard. He was unhappy. She saw it in a moment, plainer than she had let herself hope. The deep settled unhappiness of a proud man who has shut a door on his own heart, and means to keep it shut, and finds the keeping of it heavier than he had bargained. And she saw too, with the sure eye of love, that even 9 months and a forged lie could not deceive, that this was not a man who had ceased to care, but a man who was breaking his own heart on purpose, because he believed it the only honest thing left him to do, and the seeing of it steadied her past anything, for it told her that under the lie the truth of him was whole, and that if she could but once get the truth past the hand at the door and into that shut room of his heart, it would be received. He had not seen her. He looked out over the brilliant crowd that was his to command, and saw none of it, his mind plainly far off and grey. And she stood quiet by the lower wall and looked at him, the man she had come for, and waited for her hour, which was the announcement, and was not long now. It came soon. The dancing drew to a pause. The aunt, with a word here and a look there, gathered the great room's attention to the dais as a conductor gathers an orchestra. The musicians fell silent in their gallery. The 300 guests drew in toward the lower end, a great rustling, glittering crescent of them, with Mercy among the foremost, now though still unremarked, carried forward in the press, and the Honourable Mrs. Vereker took her place beside her nephew on the dais, before the laden gold and silver of the sideboard, with the frightened heiress on his other hand, and lifted her handsome head, and let the gracious public smile go out over the company, and began, in the clear, carrying, well-bred voice of a woman come to the crown of her life's work, to speak the words she had waited 30 years to speak, to welcome the county, to thank them for sharing this happy night, to tell them what they were come to witness. And she got as far as the happiness it gave the family, and the joy with which she, who had the honour to stand in a mother's place to his grace, announced to his friends and neighbours the betrothal of her dear nephew, the Duke of Holloway, too. And there she stopped, because a clear, quiet voice, a young woman's voice, level and unhurried and entirely without heat, the voice of a person used to being heard at the back of a schoolroom, had spoken from the front of the crowd into the great expectant hush and said one word. "Before you finish, madam." It was not loud. That was the thing the county remembered after, that told it over for years. It was not loud at all. In a room got up to dazzle and to drown, the voice that stopped the aunt's announcement was the one quiet voice in it, low and clear and perfectly steady, and it carried for that very reason to the farthest pier glass, because the whole vast room had fallen, at the cut of it, into the kind of silence that splendid noisy rooms keep only for the wholly unexpected. The aunt's voice stopped on the half-spoken name. 300 faces turned, and out of the front of the glittering crescent there stepped one slight figure in plain oyster white and pearl grey, a grave young woman with flaxen brown hair in a low knot and a flat pinchbeck locket at her throat, and a lean grey-muzzled dog pressing at her hem, who came forward 2 steps into the cleared space before the dais, quietly, her hands folded, her chin level, and stood there alone in the golden rain of the chandeliers before the whole assembled county and the Duke and the aunt and the frightened heiress, and was on the instant recognised. For the aunt knew her, and went in one breath from the gracious public smile to a fixed, bright, rigid stare that was the first crack in the night's long collapse, and the Duke knew her, and his grave, shut face broke open all at once into a white, arrested stillness, the look of a man who has seen the dead walk, and a low, astonished murmur of her name ran back through the crowd, the parson's daughter, Miss Allgood, the rector's girl, and died away into the deepest silence the old room had held in all its years. "My name is Mercy Allgood," she said, into that silence, in the same level voice, turning a little so that the room and not the dais should have it. For she spoke now, she had resolved, to the county as much as to the Duke, the county being her witness and her jury. "I am the daughter of the late rector of Albrook, whom many of you knew. I am not bidden to the dais, and I will not keep you from your dancing long. I am come to read you a letter, and then to show you, if you will look, 3 or 4 small matters of plain record. And then I will go, and trouble this house no further. I ask only the few minutes it would take to read a letter aloud. I think when you have heard it, you will not grudge them." The aunt found her voice. It came out of her not quite as she meant it, a half-tone too high, the public graciousness stretched thin over something that had gone rigid beneath. "Your Grace, my friends, I am sorry, deeply sorry, that the happiness of this evening should be. This is a person, an unhappy young person, once known to the family, whose mind, I fear, the loss of her father has. She is not well, she is to be pitied, but she is not. Sopwith. Where is Sopwith? Have the goodness, some of you, to see this poor young woman quietly too." And she put out her hand, the ringed hand with the little keys chiming at the wrist, in the gesture the thumbnail of the whole night would be, the gracious lady moving to have the disturbance gently removed, and several gentlemen near the front stirred uncertainly, not liking the office, and it was the Duke who stopped them, the Duke who had not yet spoken, the Duke whose white still face had never left the slight grey figure in the cleared space, for he said, in a low voice that was not loud either, and that the whole room heard. No. And then, after a breath, to the room and not to her, in the voice of the master of the house, resuming for the first time that year the mastery of it, let her read her letter. And he looked at his aunt as he said it. One level look, the first of the night, and the aunt's lifted hand came slowly down. Mercy inclined her head to him, gravely, the first acknowledgement that had passed between them in 9 months, and did not let her eyes rest on his face above a moment, because she could not yet afford what it would cost her. And she opened her plain black reticule, and took out from it a single folded letter, and held it up a moment in her bare hand, before the room, the seal toward them, that they might see it whole. "This is a letter in my own hand," she said. "I wrote it last September, and sealed it with my father's seal, which you may see is whole and unbroken, and I sent it up to this house, to his grace, by the common post, and paid the postage on it. It was sent back to me in November, the seal unbroken, never opened, never read, with one word written across it by a hand not his grace's. The word is this." She turned it and showed the front of it, the direction and the one word, first to the Duke, close, so that he and he alone could see for that instant the writing on it, and watched his face as he read it, and then to the room. "The word is returned. My letter was refused at the door of this house, and turned back within 2 days, and never carried in to the man it was written to. He never saw it. He was never told it came. Until this minute, his grace did not know that I had ever written it." She let that rest one moment in the silence, and saw the Duke's eyes go from the letter to his aunt and back, the first faint movement of a terrible understanding beginning far down. And then she broke, with her thumb, before the whole room, the seal she had pressed 9 months before, and unfolded the stiff sheet, and held it to the golden light, and read it aloud, in the level, unhurried voice of a woman reading to a schoolroom matter that must be got exactly right the first time, neither slow nor fast. Her own last letter, the one they had refused to open, every word of it, plain, without heat, into the deepening hush. She read it whole. She read the date at its head, the September of the year before. She read how she had written it, not knowing what he had been told of her, but knowing it was not true. She read, in her own quiet voice, the words she had set down in the worst grief of her life and made fair 3 times by candle, that she did not know what he believed she had done, but that she had played him false in no particular, and never would, that she had loved him from the bridge, where the music fell in the water, and loved him still, and would to the end, whatever he thought of her, that she asked nothing back, and made no claim, and would never trouble him, that she released him from everything, that she begged only one thing, that if ever he learned or guessed the charge against her, he would let her answer it, for she could not fight a shadow, and she would meet whatever it was with the plain truth, and let him judge. And that meanwhile, believing of him no ill, but only that he had been somehow deceived, she wished him, with her whole soul, every happiness this world could give him, and remained, whatever he chose to think her, his, and signed her name. It was a letter without one word of reproach in it, without anger, without pride, the letter of a woman who had been struck down without knowing why, and had answered the blow with nothing but love and an open hand and a request to be told the truth, and read out plain in that blazing room before the whole county, in the steady voice that never once broke nor rose. It did a thing that no railing, nor weeping, nor accusing could have done. It let 300 people hear, with their own ears, exactly what manner of woman had been thrown off in secret and sent back unopened from the door of that house. And the silence, when she folded it again, was no longer the silence of astonishment, but the deeper, heavier, more dangerous silence of a great company that has begun, all together, to be ashamed and to do sums. The Duke had not moved through the whole of it. He stood on the dais white to the lips, his eyes fixed on her face, and as she read he had aged and changed before the room, the guarded, tired, shut look breaking up and falling away piece by piece, and under it, coming first a dreadful doubt, and then, as the plain loving words went on, that were the very opposite in every line of the cold false letter he had been shown 9 months before, a slow, white, dawning horror, the look of a man who feels the ground he has stood a year upon begin to move under his feet, for he was hearing, in her own hand and her own voice, a woman who did not write like the woman he had been taught to despise, who wrote like the woman he had loved on the bridge, and the two could not both be real, and he was beginning, in front of them all, to understand which of them was. When she finished and folded the letter, he said low, hoarse, not caring now who heard, the first words he had spoken to her in 9 months. "I never saw it. Before God, I never saw it. They told me you. I was shown, and stopped, because his aunt had made a small movement beside him, and he turned and looked at her, fully for a long moment, in front of the county, and something came into his grave white face that the aunt had never seen there in 3 years of managing him, and did not like. "You were shown a letter, Your Grace," said Mercy quietly, taking it up for him, sparing him the saying of it. "I know. I never saw it. I have only ever guessed at it this winter, from what your servants believed and what I could piece together. But I know there was a letter, and I know what it must have said, because I know what I am accused of having done, and I have come to answer it, as I begged in the letter you have just heard to be allowed to answer it. I am told, correct me, Your Grace, if I am wrong, for you alone have seen the thing, that there was put into your hands last June a letter in my hand, or in a hand made very like mine, dated that summer, in which I was made to write to an old friend, a gentleman, that I cared nothing for you, that I was marrying you for your title and your fortune and laughing at you, and that he, my old love, must have patience and not be forgotten when I was great. I am told it was so framed that you must believe me false to you the whole time, and in a secret understanding with this other man, even as I was promised to you. Is that, Your Grace, in its substance, the letter you were shown?" The Duke said after a moment, very low, "It is. Word for word. Near enough. It was your hand. I would have sworn it was your hand." And the room heard him say it, and drew its breath, and the aunt stood very still. "It was made very like my hand," said Mercy. "I do not wonder you were deceived. Better judges than Your Grace might have been. I will come to the hand presently. But first let me show you, and these gentlemen and ladies who are so good as to hear me, why that letter, whoever wrote it, and however like my hand, is a thing that cannot by any possibility be true. Not a thing I merely deny, for what is my denial worth against my own seeming hand, but a thing that the plain dated records of 2 parishes prove to be impossible. The kind of impossible, Your Grace, that no swearing and no cleverness can mend, because it is fixed in ink that was dry before ever the letter pretended to be written." And she opened her reticule again, and took out the small, flat, folded papers she had carried up the hill in the frost, and held them a moment, and did not yet unfold them, for she had learned from her father that proof is strongest shown slowly, named before it is opened, so that the room leans toward it. "The letter you were shown, Your Grace, was dated last June, and was written, you say, to a living man, an old friend of mine, my secret lover as it would have me, who was near at hand that summer, and to whom I looked to keep faith when I should be a duchess. It named him. You knew the name. It was the name of Lieutenant Bram Caudle, of the Navy, the orphan son of my father's oldest friend, who was indeed bred almost as my brother in my father's house when we were children, and who did indeed write to me, 2 or 3 times in a year, the plain letters of the oldest of friends, one of which, an old one, I once showed you myself, openly, as the letter of the friend I had known longest in the world. That is the truth the lie was built on. For the cleverest lies, your grace, my father used to say, are built on a true foundation, that they may stand. They took my true old friend, and my true hand, and made of them a false letter. But here is the thing they did not reckon, the wrong figure in their account, and it is a date. She unfolded the first paper, and held it up, and her quiet voice went very plain and very clear, so that the farthest corner of the great room should not lose one word of it. This is a true copy, attested under the hand of the present rector of Albrook, of an entry in the parish register of Albrook, in my late father's own writing. It is a memorandum, dated, that my father entered at the time, as he entered every fact that touched his parish, and it records that Lieutenant Bram Caudle died of the yellow fever aboard his ship in the West Indies in the August of the year 1814, and that the news of his death was received in the parish that autumn. August of 1814, Your Grace. The letter you were shown was dated June of 1815. She let it fall into the silence, and did not raise her voice at all. The secret living lover, to whom I was made to write that June, 10 months later, boasting of my conquest and bidding him have patience, had then been dead, Your Grace, 11 months. He was in his grave in the West Indies before ever the letter pretended to be written to him. It is a love letter to a dead man. There went through the great room a sound that was not a cry and not a word, a long, low, indrawn breath of 300 people together, the sound a crowd makes when it sees the bottom fall out of a thing, and the Duke of Holloway put out one hand and set it flat on the sideboard among the gold plate, as if he needed it to stand. But Mercy did not stop, for she had been taught to lay the whole proof down, and not the half of it, that no room should be left for an honest doubt or a clever wriggle. And she unfolded the second paper and the third as quietly as the first, lest any here should think the register might mistake, or my father's memorandum be loose. She said, Here is a true copy, attested under the hand of its present rector, of the burial register of the parish where the Caudles lie, recording the entry made there of the lieutenant's death, with the date. And here is a true copy, likewise attested, of the inscription cut in the stone of the memorial tablet his parish raised to him, with the date of his death upon it, that any of you may go and read in the church wall this day. 3 records, Your Grace, in 3 hands, in 2 parishes, dated the same. All of them made and dry, the better part of a year before the forged letter gave that dead man a living summer and a secret love. I do not ask you to take my word that the letter is false. I ask you to look at the calendar. The dead do not receive letters, and no hand in Hampshire, however clever, can make the year 1814 come after the year 1815. She laid the 3 papers down, open on the corner of the great sideboard, among the silver and the ices, in the candlelight, where any who doubted might come and read them, and they lay there, 3 small, plain, attested sheets, the quietest things in all that blazing room, and the most terrible, and nobody, in all that county, came to dispute them. Then she turned, for the first time since she had begun, and looked full at the aunt, and the whole room with her. It remains, Your Grace, she said, still in the level voice, but gently now, almost pityingly, to ask who made that letter, and why, and how I know, and I had rather, far rather, not ask it, and would not, if the asking could be spared. But you have stood before this county tonight to be betrothed upon the strength of that letter. For it was that letter, and nothing else, that parted us. And the county has a right, and you above all have a right, to know that the thing was not chance, nor my own falseness, nor any accident of fate, but a thing made, on purpose, by a living hand in this house, that wished me gone. She paused, and when she went on, it was almost gently, and she did not name the name. I will not stand here and accuse, of my own bare word, a lady of this family in her own house, before her friends. My word is worth nothing against hers, and I know it, and I did not come to set my word against anyone's. I came to read what was written. So I will not accuse. I will only say what can be proved by this house's own books, in this house's own steward's keeping, if his grace will but ask for them. And I will leave the proving to them, and to him, and not to me. And she turned from the aunt to the Duke. Your Grace, a forged letter is not made for love. It must be paid for. The man who counterfeited my hand was paid. The persons who carried the sheets to and fro were paid. Such work is never done for nothing. And money paid in a great, well-kept house goes down in a book. I do not ask you to believe me. I ask you to send, now, before us all, for your own steward, Mr. Sopwith, who has kept your accounts and your father's and your grandfather's 35 years, an honest man who has never, to my knowledge, told you an untruth, and to ask him, plainly before this company, one question, whether there were drawn from your household accounts last summer, in the very weeks our engagement was broken, 3 several payments, in a hand he knows, to heads that answer to no service this house ever had. A sum to a Winchester man for work never delivered, a sum for a journey never made, a sum in charity to a person your parish never heard of. Ask him that, your Grace. I have never seen your books. I am a stranger to your house. If I am wrong, your own steward will say so to your face in a moment, and I shall stand confounded before you all, and you may have me put out as a slanderer and welcome. Ask him. For a long moment the Duke did not move, and then he lifted his head, and said, in a voice gone quite steady and quite cold, "Into the room, Mr. Sopwith. Come forward." And out of the press near the lower door, where he had stood the whole evening grey and neutral and unremarked with his bundle of accounts under his arm, the old steward came forward into the cleared space, spare and narrow in his snuff-brown, his pale, shrewd eyes giving nothing away, and stood before his master and bowed. And the aunt, at the sight of him coming, put out her hand again to the sideboard's edge, and the little keys at her waist chimed once, sharply, in the silence, and were still. "Sopwith," said the Duke, in that same cold, steady voice, his eyes never leaving the old man's face, "you have kept my accounts, and my father's, many years. I am going to ask you a question before this company, and I charge you, on your duty and your soul, to answer it with the plain truth, whatever it touches, and whomever. Were there drawn from my household accounts last summer, about the weeks of June and July, 3 payments such as this lady has described? To a Winchester man for work, this house never had, for a journey never made, in charity to a person unknown in the parish. Entered in a hand, you know." And the old steward stood quiet a moment and looked once, not at the aunt, but at Mercy, the briefest grave look, the only acknowledgement that ever passed between them. And then he looked at his master, and answered in his dry, flat voice, very clear, "There were, your Grace." 3. I marked them at the time, and could not reconcile them, and made a private note of my doubt, having no warrant to do more. They are in the household book in my office at this moment, your Grace, and I have the dates and the sums by heart, and the book may be sent for in 5 minutes, and the hand they are entered in, your Grace, since you charge me on my soul to speak plainly before these gentlemen, The hand is not mine, and not yours, and not any clerk's of this office. He did not say whose. He did not need to. He folded his hands on his bundle of accounts, and was silent. And the silence said it, and the whole room said it, turning as one. And the aunt stood alone against the sideboard, with 300 faces upon her, and the great diamond burning at her breast, and the prop of 30 years pulled cleanly away in front of every soul she ruled. It was over then, though it took some minutes more to be wholly over, as a great tree is down at the first crack, though it takes a while to come to the ground. The aunt rallied once. Her kind always rallies once. She drew herself up, very tall and very pale, the slate-grey silk and the diamond and the high-dressed iron hair, and she spoke, in a voice scraped together out of 30 years of command, that she would not stand to be insulted in her own house, that the girl was a clever adventuress who had got up a pack of papers and a servants' hall conspiracy to force herself back where she was not wanted, that a date might be mistaken and a steward suborned and a sum misentered by any clerk, that her nephew surely would not, before the whole county, take the word of a penniless music teacher and there she made her one fatal slip, the slip of the proud when the ground goes. For she said, the public graciousness gone out of her at last, and the cold contempt of 30 years showing naked through, that he would not take the word of a creature like that. A nobody, a thing got up out of a glebe house against the honour of his own blood. And the word nobody, hanging in that silence over the slight grave figure who had stood unmoved through it all, did more against the aunt than all Mercy's proofs, for the whole room had just heard with its own ears, in her own red letter, exactly what manner of nobody this was, and the contempt in the great lady's voice fell on a company that had turned in the last quarter of an hour entirely against her, and was heard, and was not forgiven. And the Duke turned to his aunt, and looked at her, and spoke to her at last, in front of them all, not loudly, but in a voice that went to the walls. And what was in his white grave face now was not anger, the room said after, so much as a terrible cold grief, the grief of a man who has seen the whole shape of a year's ruin at last, and the hand that made it and cannot unknow it. "Be silent, madam," he said. "You have said enough. You have said one word too many. You said it before 300 people, and I heard it. A nobody. I will tell this company what manner of nobody she is. She is the woman I asked to be my wife 2 springs ago on the bridge at Albrook, of my own free will, asking no one's leave, because she was the one honest creature I had found in 3 years of being flattered and managed and lied to in this house, and the only fault I ever truly had to find in her was that she tried to talk me out of marrying her, by telling me too plainly what it would cost me, which no other soul about me has ever once troubled to do. And you took that honesty, madam, the very thing I loved her for, and you had it forged into its own opposite, and you paid for the forging out of my own money in my own books, and you put the lie into my hands so cunningly that I, God forgive me, believed it, and broke her heart and my own, and threw her off without so much as letting her answer me. And when she wrote to me, the letter we have all just heard, the gentlest letter ever a wronged woman wrote, you turned it from my door unopened and sent it back to her, with one word in a clerk's hand, that I might never learn the truth, and your work might stand. That is what you did, madam, that I might marry where you chose and the family be great. I have stood in your hand 3 years like a glove, and called it being guided. It ends tonight." He turned from her, the room utterly silent, and looked across the cleared space at Mercy, and the cold grief in his face broke, just at the last, into something that was almost worse to see, because it was hope, and he had no right yet to it, and knew it. "Miss Allgood, I have no words to ask your pardon. There are none. I will not insult you by trying to find them tonight, before all these people, when you have had nothing from me this year, but the worst wrong one creature can do another on another's lie. I ask you only to believe one thing, and these are my witnesses, that I never saw your letter, and that from the hour I am standing in, I will spend whatever years you will allow me trying to deserve the reading of it. That is all I will say tonight. The rest I will say to you, if you will ever let me, at the bridge, where I have no right to hope you will ever come again, and where I shall go, notwithstanding. Mercy Allgood stood quiet in the golden light, the dog pressed warm against her, the 3 small attested papers lying open on the great sideboard among the silver and the ices, the whole county's eyes upon her, and the man she had loved and lost and cleared, standing white and broken, and hoping across 10 feet of chalked floor. And she did not, even then, do any of the things a lesser nature might have done. She did not triumph, nor weep, nor reproach him, nor fall into his arms before them all, nor turn the knife in the fallen aunt. She had come to be believed, not to be revenged, and she was believed, and that was enough, and more than enough, and she would take no more of it in public than the truth itself required. She inclined her head to the Duke, gravely, once. "I came tonight, your Grace," she said in the level voice, to him and to the room, to read a letter that had been refused, and to lay down what was written, and to be believed. Not to be revenged, for I was bred by a man who taught me there is all the difference in the world between wanting the truth told and wanting another soul brought low, and that a body had best be very sure which of the two is driving her before she does a thing that cannot be undone. The truth is told. I am believed. I want nothing brought low, not even. And here she looked once, gravely, without heat, at the aunt, and away, not even what has wronged me most, for she has lost tonight, before all her friends, the one thing she gave her whole life to keep, and there is no punishment I could wish her, nor would, that is heavier than the one she has carried up to herself, which is the seeing of her own work undone in the open by a date in an old book. She paused, and her grave young voice, for the only time that evening, gentled almost to tenderness, and she said the one thing the county carried away from that night, and says yet at Albrook when a hard matter is to be judged. My father used to tell me that the truth is patient, and asks no help of anger, but only to be let into the room. I have let it in. What it does now is not mine to command, nor yours, nor any of ours. It is the truth's, and it will do its own work, in its own time, on us all, the wronged and the wrongdoer alike, more justly than we ever could. I will say, good night. And she gathered up her 3 small papers from among the gold plate, quietly, and folded them away, and took up the returned letter, and put it with them, and turned, with the dog at her heel, to go out of the blazing room the way she had come, alone, on no man's arm, having spoken not one word in anger, and proved every word she spoke. But she did not go out alone, and that was the last thing the county saw, and the best, and told of longest. For Honoria Brace, the frightened heiress, the betrothed, who had stood through the whole of it forgotten on the dais, in her blonde lace and her grandmother's pearls, came down of a sudden from her place, quickly, before her own people could stop her, and crossed the cleared floor, and caught Mercy's hand in both her own, and there were tears on the pretty anxious face, but they were not unhappy tears. And her voice, when it came, was the voice of a young creature let suddenly out of a locked room into the air. "I am so glad," she said, low and shaking, not caring who heard. "Oh, I am so glad. I never wished it. You must believe I never wished it. They arranged it, my father, and I durst not say no. I did not know I was allowed to say no. But I never wished it, and I have been so afraid, and you are so, please, please believe I am glad." And Mercy Allgood, who had come into that room prepared for everything but kindness from the girl chosen in her place, looked at the frightened, generous young face and felt the last hard thing in her own heart go soft. And she pressed the heiress's hands in hers and said gently that she did believe it, that she had seen it in her face across the room and been sorry for her the whole evening, and that she was glad too, for both their sakes, that the truth had set them both free of a thing neither of them had wanted. And she bent and kissed the wet, pretty cheek and let the girl's hands go. And the two young women, the one who had been thrown off and the one chosen in her place, parted in the middle of that great room as friends and not as rivals, before the whole county, which had perhaps never in its long glittering history seen the like, and did not know whether to weep or to cheer. And in the end, here and there about the room, quietly, disgracefully, splendidly, did both. And then Mercy went out, with her dog, into the cold, clean night, and the Honourable Mrs. Vereker was left standing alone on her own dais, before the wreck of her life's work and the turned backs of her friends, in the blaze of the 1,000 candles she had lit for her triumph. And that is the last the county ever saw of her in any room of any consequence, for she left the priory within the week, and the neighbourhood not long after, and went to a small establishment of her own at a distance, a proud, cold, solitary woman with 30 years' work, undone in an hour and an old book's date for an epitaph. And the moor, which is to say the county, hearing of her going, did not triumph over her, that not being its way with a beaten neighbour, but only said, slowly, among themselves, that pride that will not be honest is a hard master and pays poor wages at the last, and let her go. And the worst of her punishment, which was also the justest, she carried with her, and it was the same Mercy had named in the blazing room, and would wish on no one, the knowing that she had done it all herself, and undone it, and that the instrument of her ruin had been nothing grander than the truth set quietly down in a book by an honest hand at the time, against which all her cleverness and all her pride and all her 30 years had not weighed, in the end, so much as a single dry, dated line. The county did not get its dancing again that night. The ball broke up early, the betrothal undrunk, the great match shattered past mending in the sight of 300 witnesses, and the carriages went down the lit sweep and away into the frost, full of a talk that would not be exhausted in the county for a generation, and they rated it, the older people said, the best night seen at Halloway Priory in 50 years, the more because the wronged had taken nothing for herself, out of the wronging, but the plain truth, which the county, being at bottom a just one, held to be exactly as it should be, and the surest sign that the parson's girl was, as her father had been before her, the genuine article, and not to be matched in 3 counties for a quiet way of being right. She had gone home that night across the frost, as she had come, on foot with the dog, and had not let the Duke nor any other follow her, having a great need to be alone with what had been done. And she had walked down the lit lane and out under the bare beeches and across the chalk stream footbridge at the bottom of the valley, the plain, weathered timber bridge where it had all begun 2 summers since over a music book fallen in the water, and had stopped there a while in the starlight, alone, with the stream running full and silver and cold beneath, at the very rail where the grave young man who proved to be a duke had once handed her the wet leaves back in their right order. And there, on the bridge, with no one by to see, Mercy Allgood, who had not wept at her father's grave that year, nor at the last short letter in June, nor at the returning of her own letter unopened in November, nor through the whole long ordeal of the blazing room, sat down at last on the cold, worn step of the bridge, with her arms round the old dog's neck, and wept, quietly, for a long while, in the dark, for everything, for her father, and for the wasted year, and for the lie believed, and for the love nearly lost and not yet won, and for the plain, hard mercy of a truth that had cost her so much and come so late and saved her after all. And the dog bore it, as he had borne the worst year of both their lives, leaning his grey weight against her and keeping very still. And the chalk stream ran on under the bridge in the dark, as it had run before ever the Carfaxes built their great house on the hill, and would run after they were dust, carrying nothing and keeping nothing and asking nothing, the way her father had said the truth itself ran, patient and cold and clean, doing its own work in its own time, needing no help of anyone's anger. And after a while she dried her eyes and got up and went home to the cold glebe house and lit the fire and slept. He came to the bridge the next day, as he had said he would, having no right to hope she would come and going notwithstanding. And she was there, having no intention of going and going notwithstanding. And the two grave people stood on the plain timber bridge in the cold March noon with the stream running clear below, much as they had stood the first day over the fallen music, and were a long while saying anything at all. He did not this time come at it sideways, nor with any pretext of a fault in the Corelli. He was past all that, and so was she. He told her, plainly, standing at the rail and looking at the water and not at her, because he could not yet look at her and say it, the whole of what had been done to them both, so far as he now understood it, which, after a night's reckoning with his steward and his own conscience, was very fully. He made no excuse for himself, and offered none, but laid the whole of his own folly and his own broken faith before her as plainly as she had laid her papers on the sideboard. The way, she thought, listening. A man lays an account before the person he has wronged when he is resolved to pay it to the last farthing, whatever it comes to, how the letter had been given him, and how he had believed it, and why. The one weak place in him it had been made to strike, the lonely, proud dread of being valued only for his coronet. How he had shut his heart and turned the key and would not let himself so much as ask her, lest he be the gull the letter named. How he had let himself be carried, grey and not caring, into the great match, because nothing seemed to signify any longer once the one thing had failed. And how, all that black year, some part of him far down had never been easy, had never quite believed it of her, had grieved as for a death and not as for a deception, though he had not dared to listen to it. And then he turned from the water and looked at her at last, the level dark grey eyes that she had loved on this bridge 2 summers gone, and asked her, not as a duke asks anything, but as one plain person asks another for the one thing in the world that matters, whether it were possible after all of it, the lie and the year and the wrong, that she could ever bring herself to forgive him enough to let him begin, slowly at whatever pace she chose, to try to earn back what he had thrown away. And that he would take a year, or 5, or however long she set, and ask no more than to be allowed to come to the bridge and be looked at out of her honest eyes, as if he might one day be honest too. Which was the thing, he said, that he had loved before he knew he loved her, and had missed every day of the wasted year, more than he had missed his own peace. And Mercy, who had been bred to honesty above all things and would not pretend even now to a coldness she did not feel, nor a quickness she did not mean, gave him her answer in the level voice of the schoolroom and the desk, neither slow nor fast, looking at him plainly. She told him that she had loved him from this bridge, and had never left off loving him, not through the worst of it, which he had a right to know, and which she would not hide out of pride, pride having cost them both too dear already. That she had not cleared herself before the county to win him back, but only to be believed, and would have done it just the same if he had been nothing to her, because a lie set up in public must be met with truth in public, or the truth dies. But that being believed, and being loved and loving, she saw no virtue and no sense in pretending otherwise, her father having had no patience with a person who would cut off her own nose to spite her own face and call it dignity. She told him that she forgave him, that it was not even so very hard to forgive once she had understood how the thing was done. For a lie made that cunningly, built on her own true hand and her own true friend, and struck at the one weak place in a faithful heart, might have deceived a wiser and a colder man than he, and that the wonder was not that he had believed it a while, but that some true part of him had gone on doubting it the whole year against the evidence of his own eyes, and that a man whose heart would not quite let him believe a thing his reason had been forced to was a man worth waiting on the bridge for. But she told him too, plainly, that she would not be hurried, nor go up to the great house as a triumph to be shown, nor have the thing done in a way that let the county say the parson's girl had caught her duke after all, that they would take the slow, honest road and not the quick, proud one, that he should court her, if he would, openly and patiently, and at the pace of the chalk stream, which did nothing for hurrying and everything for patience, and that she would keep him to it. And that when, in due time and no sooner, the valley had seen for itself that the thing was built on the truth, and not on her cleverness, nor his consequence, then, if he were still of the same mind, she would marry him at Albrook Church where her father lay, with the parish that had known her all her life to see it, and not before. And he said that he asked nothing better in the world than to be kept to the river's pace by the one person he had ever met who could be trusted to keep him to it, and that he had built nothing in his life that lasted until he tried to build it slow and honest, and would build this slowest and honestest of all. And the two of them shook hands on it, gravely, on the bridge, like two people closing an honest bargain, which they were, with the dog watching as at a right, and the stream running clear below. And that, and not the scene in the blazing room, was the true betrothal, and the only one either of them ever afterward counted. The spring came up the valley that year as the valley likes it best to come, slow and cold, and then all at once, the chalk stream dropping clear over its gravel, the beech hangers breaking into the tenderest green, the water meadows drawn dry and golden with kingcups, the May whitening at last in the hedges. And Mercy Allgood was courted that spring at the footbridge at Albrook by the Duke of Halloway in the plainest and most patient and most public fashion the county ever witnessed, openly at the pace of the stream, with no fine ornament and no haste and no condescension on the one side, nor any scheming on the other. He came down the valley most fair days to the bridge or the glebe house, on foot, in plain country clothes, much as he had worn the first day, and walked the meadows with her and the dog, and sat in the shabby book-lined parlour where her father had talked Greek at him, and learned, slowly, under her grave eye, to put off the braced, unhappy look of the managed man, and be again, more and more, the grave, glad, honest creature she had met on the bridge before either of them knew what the other was, and the valley watched it all with the deep proprietary satisfaction of people watching a wrong come right at the pace. Nature meant and approved, and let them be, and did not, in the end, say that the parson's girl had caught her duke, because by midsummer it was as plain to the meanest cottager as it was to the principals that it was rather the other way, and that the Duke of Halloway had been given back by a poor honest girl and an old book, a thing he had very nearly lost for good, which was not a wife merely, but his own true self, and that this was a fortune beside which the heiress's £100,000 was a small matter, and the county, being just, said so. Mr. Sopwith the steward kept his place and his master's confidence to the end of his days, and a good deal more of both than before, the Duke having learned in one hard night exactly what an honest book and an honest man who keeps it are worth to a great house, and exactly what the want of them costs. And his Grace was heard to say, more than once after, that the cheapest servant in England is the one who keeps a true book, and the dearest is the one who keeps a false, and that he had paid the dear one's wages for 3 years, and would never knowingly pay them again. And he took, ever after, a particular care of the office and the accounts, and would have the books before him, and learn to read them, holding, he said, that a man who will not look into his own books had better not complain when somebody else writes in them what he pleases. And the old steward's daughter Patience, who had carried the dry word that broke the case, was remembered too, and stood, in her time, at a wedding, very near the bride. The wedding was not that year, Mercy holding to the slow road she had laid down, and the Duke keeping faith with it. It was the next spring, a full year and more from the night of the ball, by which time the valley had seen the thing through every season and pronounced it sound, and the proudest matchmaking mother in 3 counties could not have found in it a single thread of haste or scheme to pull at, and it was kept, as Mercy had said it should be, at Albrook Church, where her father lay, on a bright cold morning with the May not yet out, and the chalk stream running full and clear under the mended footbridge below. The present rector reading the service in the church her father had served, the parish that had known her from a child filling the small grey building and the churchyard beyond, the Duke in dark blue and the bride in the oyster-white silk, made over yet again, with the flat pinchbeck locket at her throat, Mr. Sopwith standing very near, and his daughter Patience by the bride, and Honoria Brace, who had become in that year Mercy's true and constant friend, and was by then happily promised to a plain Wiltshire squire of her own choosing, whom she did love, come the length of 2 counties to see it with a glad face, and old Mrs. Tapp from the mill, who had told Mercy on this very bridge 2 springs gone who the grave young man was, weeping comfortably in a front pew, and the lean grey-muzzled dog Verity, washed under protest in the stream the day before, lying across the chancel step with his grey muzzle on his paws and his amber eyes making the slow grave circuit of the whole company gathered for once into one fold, having reviewed every soul of them at the gate and passed them. And there was no aunt, and her absence was the one fact nobody mentioned and everybody felt, like a cold place in a warm room, and let be. And the dukedom got, in Mercy, a duchess such as it had not had in living memory, for she carried into the house on the hill the one thing it had most lacked, a person at the head of it who kept true books and asked the true questions and could not be deceived, nor flattered, nor managed, and who held, and taught it slowly to hold, that the smallest fact set down honestly at the time it happened is worth more in the long account than all the cleverness in Hampshire. And under her the charities were kept fair, and the accounts kept true, and the dependents kept faith with. And the valley, that had once come out to its doors to watch the house blaze on a ball night and gone in again to bank its one candle, came in time to look up at the lights of it with a different feeling, knowing who kept the books behind them now. But the truest monument of it all stood, fittingly, not at the house at all, but at the bottom of the valley, where everything had begun and ended, for the Duke, that first summer of his courting, had quietly had the old timber footbridge taken down where it had begun to rot and built up again new and sound, on its same 2 brick piers, with a good oak handrail where a man might lean and watch the trout, and a passing place kept where 2 might stand aside for one another over the clear water. And he had set into the new stone of the abutment, where any soul that crossed must pass it, a small slab, cut with a single line, no name and no date and no flourish, 6 words that were Mercy's father's, and were now the valley's, cut sharp in the chalk country stone to outlast them all. A true word kept is a kindness, and the parish read it, crossing, and carried it off to the smithy and the church porch, and quotes it yet when a matter is to be settled honestly. And the stream ran on clear beneath it, the way the truth runs, doing its own work in its own time. And the 2 of them, who had cleared him with an old book and a dead man's date, crossed it most fair evenings of their long life together, with a dog at their heel and in time a child at their hand, and were content. If you have kept this cold, bright Hampshire spring at the bridge and the desk and the blazing saloon these many minutes past, at Mercy Allgood's steady hand, from the letter sent back unopened with one cold word in a stranger's writing, through the slow gathering of the small, true books of the valley, the dead man's date attested out of 2 parishes, the household's own accounts owned at last by the honest steward in his master's hearing, and the one quiet letter read aloud at the foot of the dais until the proud lie broke itself upon a thing written down plainly at the time it happened, then you have stood where the parson's daughter stood, alone in the golden rain of 100 candles with the truth folded small in her hand, and heard the great room go from its glitter to its shame in the space of a letter read, without one word of anger in it. So before the music takes the room again, sit a moment with the question her father left without quite asking it. When you are wronged in the dark by someone stronger than you, and the lie is published and crowned, and you have got the proof of the truth at last in your hand, which is the harder thing, and which the better? To use it to bring the wrongdoer low, as you have the power and almost the right to do, and be revenged, or to use it only to be believed, and let the truth do its own slower work on the guilty and the wronged alike, and what no one brought down, not even what has hurt you most. Mercy chose the second, and her father bred her to it. But it is no easy choice, and an honest soul may feel the pull of the first to the last day of a long life. Tell us, at the smithy below, which you would have chosen, standing in that blazing room with the dead man's date in your hand and the proud lie waiting, and tell us the county and the quiet water you keep your own days beside, for every valley has its great house and its plain bridge, its proud lie and its one true book, and we should like to know yours. Next we go a county eastward, to a sealed pew and a will read out of turn, and a young companion the family meant to send away with nothing, who had kept, all the while, a plainer book than theirs, but that is another house, and another wrong come right, and not yet entered. On a soft grey-growing morning in the spring of the 2nd year after, the rooks loud in the high elms by Albrook Church, and the May just breaking white in the hedges, the Duchess of Halloway came down the valley, from the great house on foot, with her husband and the old grey-muzzled dog, as she did most fair mornings, to the mended footbridge at the bottom where the slab stood with its 6 cut words, and she carried under her arm, this morning, a plain new marbled book, the first volume of the careful, honest record of the estate's charities that she had undertaken to keep with her own hand, as her father had kept his parish, day by day, in a clear ruled column, what was given and to whom and on what day, and no flourish and nothing wished for set down in the place of a thing true. And she sat a while on the worn step of the bridge in the cool of the morning with the book on her knee, and the clear chalk stream running full and bright beneath, and the dog at her feet, and her grave husband leaning on the new rail, watching the trout in the tailwater, the way he had watched them the first day she ever saw him. And she opened the new book to its first page, and ruled it, and wrote at the head of it, in the even hand that would keep that and many another true book at Halloway for 40 years to come, the date, and the weather, the morning fair, and the stream clear, and the May in bud, and under it, for the first entry, in the plain fashion her father had taught her, and the old miller's valley would have known for kin, 6 words, and no more, that were the whole of what she had learned, and the whole of what she meant to keep. A true word kept is a kindness, and she blotted it, and looked at it, and found it answered, and the chalk stream ran on clear beneath the bridge, and the dukedom's true book was begun and goes on.